So, good morning. I was asked to talk to you today about the CT tools that are available to help with CT issues through AAPM. And this winds up being everything about the CT working group website tools. So if you've been in and out and inside out with those and know them front to back, this is going to be really boring. And so your time might be spent better somewhere else. But if you haven't taken the time to really look through this lately, you probably want to see how this is working. So the full name of the working group is the AAPM Working Group on Standardization of CT Nomenclature and Protocols. This is led by Cynthia McCullough and myself. Our charge is to develop consensus protocols for frequently performed CT exams, summarizing the basic requirements of the exam and giving several model-specific examples of scan and reconstruction parameters. So this was really the main charge, and this working group really came out of a conversation that Bill Handy and Cynthia and I had at RSNA 3 or 4 years ago, where he was really concerned that there weren't enough materials out there for the physicists in the field to do a better job of getting a grip on what's happening in CT. And so this working group sort of evolved out of that conversation. The other thing we are charged with doing is developing a set of standardized terms for use on CT scanners. We've all been faced with this. The vendors all use different words for the same darn thing, and it confuses the heck out of everybody, from the technologist to the physicist to the radiologist. This is more of a long-term goal. You can imagine the reluctance that the vendors have about changing stuff like that. There are really good terms that have been developed that are quite vendor specific, and it's, I think, going to be a major negotiation to figure out whose terms we use for this and whose terms we kind of throw away. So I will admit we haven't gotten terribly far on that part yet. The membership of this working group includes a number of CT physicists with specific CT expertise from both academic and consulting backgrounds. We have several folks from the ACR that are really helpful, especially Dr. Armstrong. He's a practicing clinical radiologist, and so he weighs in very often on some of the more clinical radiologist types of issues. We have one member from the ASRT, Virginia Lester, who's also pretty critical to this because she really comes at it from the technologist operator side. We have Thalia Mills from the FDA, who is really helpful on a lot of the governmental regulation. She kind of sees big picture better than some of the rest of us do. We wouldn't be getting anywhere with this, though, if we didn't have vendor representation. So these are the folks who are currently assigned to us, kind of like it or not, and they're expected to show up on our TCONs. We have a telephone conference, WebEx, twice a month. So this is something that's very regular and routine, and we kind of need that if we're going to make real progress on a lot of these projects that we've decided to take on. There are actually, in addition to these folks, they often bring in protocol experts from their own organization to help with some of the nuances and the details on the protocol issues. We have to pull in extra people once in a while to help us with specific things. Right now we're tackling some pediatric protocols, and so we need some pediatric radiologists for that. And so Marilyn Goski and Sujir Wester are really pitching in with that and helping us out with those protocol details. We have a couple of folks from the DICOM world that show up occasionally to help us deal with specific DICOM type questions. This is the AAPM homepage, which you should be very familiar with. Your homepage won't say, "Hello, Dr. Cody," and all this junk, but the rest of this should look pretty familiar. There's the CT protocols button over here on the lower left-hand side. That's how you get into this piece of the website. And you've been seeing this weird little thing pop up on a bunch of my slides already. This is our new icon. Ta-da! Brand new. We've been asked by the Technology Assessment Committee to do a better job of branding. And so this is one of the features, one of the pieces of that. It kind of goes along, and if you can't quite see the words, you will ad nauseum through this talk. It says CT safely. And we're trying to sort of build on some of the previous mottos that you should also be familiar with, like image wisely, image gently, all these LY words. So we went with CT safely as our motto on our brand new logo. So, and I put it there because it's likely to replace this CT protocols button. So it probably won't change position, although I can't guarantee that. It may look a little bit different very soon. We actually have to figure out how to get it to be a registered trademark, and so we're going to be putting the AAPM lawyers to work on that. May take who knows how long to get that done. I'm sure we'll all find out way more than we ever wanted to know about that process. So once you get through the CT protocols button and you click on the lawyerese junk that's already in there, you wind up seeing this piece. And there are a number of tabs on here that give you different kinds of information. The one on the left says purpose, so this talks about our charge and what it is we're trying to do here. One says questions. I haven't actually looked in there lately. And there's one that says role of the qualified medical physicist. You might want to check that out. The rest of these are what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. There's a tab for CT dose check. There's a tab for, I can barely read this up here. Well, you'll see when we get there. All of this stuff is very intentionally open to the public, so you don't have to log in to get to this. Initially, that's how we kind of set it up, because this was an AAPM sponsored work group, and we kind of wanted this to be a benefit to AAPM members. However, it didn't take very long before other folks who were really invested in CT improvements decided they needed to get in there without bothering their physicist, who they might or might not see on a regular basis. And the clamor got to the level of sound that we just finally convinced AAPM to open this up to everyone. So this is available really to anybody who clicks on it. So we're going to first go into this CT dose check tab. And what tends to happen with some of these working group and task groups is if you have a pretty good group of people who are actually working on stuff, they get asked to do more stuff. It's sort of like, the busy person is the one you go to when you need help out with things. So this busy work group has gotten more tasks laid in our lap than we had initially anticipated. And one was the CT dose check thing. So if you don't have a fairly new scanner, you might not be aware of this. If you have a scanner that's come out in the last, I'd say, year or two, it probably has this on there. You may or may not be aware of it. It tends not to trip until you hit one of these alert levels. And if you don't do a lot of really high dose kinds of exams, you might never trip it and might not even know it's on there, because it tends to be very silent and invisible until you stumble over it. So the CT dose check feature came out of MITA. It's intended to serve as a safety feature on newer scanners. There are 2 levels of dose checking. One is called the alert level. This is set at 1 gray for the entire cumulative CTDivol of an exam. It's sort of an arbitrary value that should be the same for every vendor and every scanner that has this particular feature. The notification value is quite different. This one you can set for each beam-on event, except for the scouts. I don't think that's allowed. But pretty much every other beam-on event through the patient, you can set this notification level yourself and put it into practice and sort of see what happens. These dose check levels are totally adjustable by the site. The flexibility of them really depends on the vendor. Some let you just put a straight value in. Others let you use sort of a ratio, a factor for this this notification value. They're all just a little bit different. But at least we've just started to get into this, and you can set it up for the bolus tracking piece, for every single helical run, for every axial run, for pretty much every piece of an exam. Some of these include some kind of protocol parameter export feature. So this might be another way to get a handle on what's set up on that scanner that you can actually pull into maybe an Excel spreadsheet or stick it on your thumb drive or something like that. They don't all have this, but several of them do seem to have incorporated that. So this is what the alert level messages will look like. You should be able to sort of recognize the message style of your vendor. They all have some common elements. They all require, to get past this alert level, this is the 1 gray level, they all require some kind of specific password to get past this. They might require something in addition. And I will warn you, this surprised us on the GE scanners that it was first installed on. We thought we had things set up, but we didn't. So there's, on some of the scanners, there's like different levels of user that you can just set up at the beginning, and you need to get that sorted out really clearly, because we thought we had it under control and we didn't. So what happens in a clinical exam, and for us, this only really tripped during CT perfusion, neuro CT perfusion, because you do a no contrast, a with contrast, that's the whole cine run, and then very often some angio runs after that. And so it's a lot of exams, and you can get up to that 1 gray total. And when that happens, it happens just before you're about to do the next run. And so you're usually kind of stressed out because there's, contrast issues and timing things going on. And you hit this alert level, and you put your password in, and you try and get past it. And if you don't have that set up exactly right, it won't let you go. And your only recourse is to end the exam and start over and set it all up again, which is going to take you several minutes of a technologist scrambling around, cussing crazily at the scanner, and the radiologist stamping their feet, and nobody's happy. So I would strongly suggest, if you think you're ever going to be in that situation, to test it out. The other people that tend to run into this are physicists during annual testing, because you set up a big long set of runs, and all of a sudden you get to the point where it won't go any further. But I would suggest doing that and making sure that your password thing actually works, so that in a clinical situation you're not scrambling around like we were, because that was kind of ugly. The other thing you're going to need to be careful of is who has that password, and to make sure that all the techs know to go to the person or the couple of people who actually holds that password. It's not something you probably want everybody to know, but they do need to know how to get their hands on it if that situation comes up. So that was the CT dose check piece. Oh, that's not all that's there. Good. So if you keep going, if you hit that tab, you'll get to a screen that looks like this, and there's actually a PDF document with some suggestions on how to set those notification values. So the alert value is preset. You can change it if you want, but as far as I can tell, nobody's really messing with that. But these notification values can be kind of a mystery on how to deal with that. So the overall workflow impact can be a problem with this. What you want to do is alert the tech before some relatively high exam is performed. And what that relatively high threshold is going to totally depend on the exam and the site and the comfort level of the folks involved. Don't be surprised if whatever you pick to start out with needs to be adjusted. I totally expect that to happen. And you have to be careful with this notification value. It's kind of the porridge being too hot or too cold or just right. If it's too low, it will happen all the time, like every other exam, and people will expect to see it, and they won't take it seriously, and pretty soon it'll be totally ignored. So there's no safety there. If it's too high, it will never trip, and that's really not giving you much safety either. So there's sort of a good sweet spot that we're all going to probably have to find for some of these exams. So these are the initial values that the work group all kind of agreed on for some basic CT exams. And you can see they're a little bit on the high side, and that's kind of the idea. We don't want people to get too used to seeing them. They should be ooh, this is a scary thing. I haven't seen this before, kind of a reaction. We actually, at my place, set our value, and then I remembered, oh, these numbers are out here. I should probably take a look at them and see what it said. And it turned out that the value we picked was actually pretty close to the one that was in this table, which gave me a little bit of comfort that we weren't completely on planet Mars. So this process was really recommended by the FDA several years ago in response to the repeated overexposure incidents. So this was something the FDA kind of went to the manufacturers as a group and said, we got to do something about this. And this was the response. It's very likely to be needing to be reviewed on a regular basis. This is going to be one of those protocol parameters that you're going to have to look at on probably an annual or biannual basis to make sure it's still meeting the needs. It's on newer model CT scanners for the GEs. It's definitely on the VCTs and up. We just got a brand new Siemens flash scanner, and for sure it was on that. I'm not sure how far back the other vendors go. There's also sort of what would you call it? Not really a survey, an audit tool on all of these. This was another thing that the FDA, I think, asked for. So you can go in on a regular basis, maybe monthly, maybe after you get comfortable with it, quarterly, and get a list of how many times you hit the alert value, how many times the notification value was exceeded, and any more information that might have been entered about those. So you can start to look for who are the frequent flyers here? Is there one technologist that's doing this all the time? Or is it the day shift? Is it the weekend folks? You can kind of start to untangle what's happening there. The notification value windows are a little bit different between the vendors, but they all have a text field. And what we've done is we've given the text some specific things that we want them to put in that text field. What the interface asks is, give me a reason for bypassing this. If you're going to exceed this notification value, what's the medical reason for this? What's the rationale? And so we have told them that they need to first put in their ID number, their worker ID number. If you don't have 50 or 60 technologists, initials might work. If you use, some of them might actually be able to track the login, but everybody logs in as emergency in our place, so that didn't work for us. And there are people who actually have the same 3 initials, so that wasn't going to work for us either. So we went with ID. Everybody has this very specific ID number at our place. And then we have some specific phrases that we're trying to get them to use so that we don't see 120 different ways of saying the same thing, which we often get. And right now, our rationale, our reasons that we can think of ahead of time are large patient, metal in the field, and oddball position, although it doesn't say that. It says something about patient position not standard, because we're trying to think of ways where the scout view might think the patient is really thick or highly attenuating. And those were the 3 things we could think of to come at the beginning. We'll see how this how this rolls out. We've only started this a few weeks, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But the other thing that's one of the not so great parts of the audit tool piece is that you have to take yourself to the scanner and do it. And I think you hopefully will be able to put those results on a memory stick. We should be able to get that figured out. But it's not something that we have figured out how to do remotely. So we couldn't sit at our workstation, many miles away and try and get this electronically. So far, they all seem to require you to actually physically be there. Those of you from Texas are very well aware that our regulations changed as of May 1st, and now the state of Texas requires us to establish reference values for each CT exam. We have to monitor our patients and identify those patients whose dose value has actually exceeded this reference value. And we've been really dragging our feet trying to put this in motion. We kind of had this idea from the beginning on what we were going to do, but it's not until we learned that they're coming to inspect us next month and see how we've handled this that we actually got it going. That's why we just have, in the last few weeks, got this started so that the techs hopefully will be a little more comfortable with it by the time the inspectors show up and start asking them a lot of questions. So the way we have set our reference value here, or our notification value, is we know part of our protocol sheets for our GE scanners has a CTDivol value in it. And because we were mostly using 2-current modulation, that would be kind of all over the place for all of our patients. So we put the maximum in there so that we can at least get a feel for what's the maximum dose that this protocol could possibly deliver to a patient. So we've taken that number, that maximum, and we've added 10% to it, and that's our notification value. So that's kind of how we have interpreted this. And my feeling is that if we hit it on a GE scanner, that's a true screw-up. We really need to do something before we, go forward on that. And so we set it up in a way that it should not ever be hit. Maybe that, and it is a safety value. It may not be quite what the regulators had in mind, and we'll kind of see how they feel about that when they show up next month. But that's how we've set it on our GE scanners. For simplicity's sake, we decided to just use those same numbers on our Siemens scanners, which don't have a maximum MA on their 2-current modulation schemes, and so we're more likely to actually hit that value on the Siemens scanner. So we'll see how this plays out. So far as I can tell, we haven't hit it on any of the scanners yet. It's just been a few weeks, but it could be that it's happening and no one's telling me. So we'll see how that goes. But we're planning to do the audit thing once a month to start with, and as things start to be a little more comfortable, we'll probably push that off to once a quarter and maybe further. And this is, for me, sort of a temporary measure until we get a dose tracking software really up installed and running. They tend to have better tools than this to do what the Texas regulations really want us to do. And so I'm hoping eventually to kind of move this into that kind of a program. The protocols that we have up, you can get to under the protocol tab. These are right now 4 protocols that are there: the adult chest, the adult abdomen, the adult head, and the neuroperfusion exams. So these are what's there right now. These are intended to be sort of reference protocols. This doesn't mean that they're perfect, but we wanted these to be up there so that people could look at their particular scanner model and we'll see what they've got set up and have something to look at to say, wow, are we way off base or are we pretty close? And so that's really what it was intended to be, a reasonable combination of parameters. It's not optimized in any sense. It's not perfect. and it's not even necessarily recommended. It's just a reasonable set of protocols for each sort of basic exam. We've got 7 manufacturers now represented, including a few of the smaller ones. So if you're not aware of that, you might want to check that out if you have some of these other scanner types. And as you would expect, the vendors really want to show the newest model, their latest and greatest stuff. And so sometimes we have to coax them a little bit to give us some information for the older, more vintage scanners that are in greater numbers out in the field. We always have beginning stuff that you actually, it's easy to blow by this, but you might want to take a look. There is a section on indications, on sort of key elements. There might be something on dose management. They're all a little bit different because they need to be sort of customized for the exam. The perfusion one is kind of nice because it has some pretty pictures in there too, to sort of get everybody up to speed on what that exam is about. The adult head protocol has a table in there on that beginning stuff that talks about the differences between doing a routine head in either axial or helical mode. And there may be some advantages and disadvantages that you hadn't appreciated before and that you might want to discuss with your radiologist. From the CT accreditation program perspective, we're seeing more and more folks going to helical scanning on routine heads. And I can't necessarily recommend it one way or another. I think a lot of the benefits and advantages might be vendor specific. But this is something you might want to take a look at when you get a chance. The chest, abdomen, pelvis protocol, and this is still in draft mode. This is one that I'm leading. The way this process works is one of the physicists takes ownership of getting this all put together. So there's one of the physicists who continually harasses the vendors to give us your parameter sets, and then that physicist is in charge of compiling the entire document, making sure all the nitty-gritty details are worked in. And I managed to sidestep all the previous ones, but it was finally my turn, and so I wound up with the chest, abdomen, pelvis protocol. So I know what this is because I actually made this table. And with the chest, abdomen, pelvis, instead of axial versus helical, here there's a distinction between doing it all in one run, which is called a single acquisition from like chin down to mid-thigh, something like that. Or folks often will do that in separate acquisitions, say the chest separate from the abdomen, pelvis. At my institution, we actually do each piece separate. The chest, the abdomen, and the pelvis are actually 3 separate BMON events. So, and there's advantages and disadvantages for each approach, and so that's also spelled out in this document. So you might want to take a look at that to see if there are benefits that maybe aren't being appreciated at your spot. But the protocol sheets are very specific to the vendor, so what you will see on them are the parameters, the terms that are actually on the interface. So you won't have to do any funky translation trying to figure out what do they mean by this. They should match the interface word for word. And there is a value in each one of the slots that actually makes sense. What's coming up, we have just recently decided with the recent fuss over lung cancer screening, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get asked, happened twice last week, what do you use for your lung cancer screening protocol parameters? This was the Military Service Review Board that has been fairly negative about radiology screening programs recently, actually came out in favor of lung cancer screening. So that was sort of a big surprise, at least to me. And so we're expecting to see lots more people interested in how to do this. And so we're going to try and fast track that one. Mike McNiggray is going to lead that. Chest, abdomen, pelvis, I'm working on, and we're also getting pretty close to releasing a pediatric head CT set of parameters. And I imagine we may have at least these 2 on board by the end of the year, and hopefully the lung cancer screening one as well. So those 3 should be added in here pretty soon. Next on our to-do list is a pediatric chest protocol. pediatric abdomen pelvis, and perhaps a CT coronary calcium scoring protocol. And at some point, we keep saying this and not doing it, but at some point we're going to have to go back and actually review what we already have on there to make sure that everything is good. We have found a few things that needed to be adjusted already on some of them. So the next little tab here says lexicon. And this is what we've done as sort of a sort of a stepping stone towards the nomenclature project, where we're trying to get all the vendors to agree on what one single term to use. This is sort of in place of that. This is basically a translator. And so we're all aware of what a struggle this is, and technologist training and understanding. So long term, we want to get some generic terms figured out. Short term, this is this translator that's available, and it's been divvied up into this many pieces, and so you can go in and look at any part of it that you want. It's pretty sure it's a PDF document. And now you see the 7 vendors again, so it's getting a little bit wide in terms of a table. But there will be a generic descriptor on the left and what each vendor actually uses as a term marching down the column. So this is especially helpful when you get a new scanner in and you're really trying to nail down what's this mean relative to what I know. And so you can look at you can look for the term that I know, where is that, and see for this new vendor what they call it. And it can be really helpful. Some of the vendors have actually asked to be able to copy part of this during their training sets, because they're frequently training technologists who understand a different vendor, and this one is brand new. And so they've taken to using this tool to help train new technologists. It's also just useful for teaching. The last piece is some educational material. And this has a strange initiation. This was probably 5 years ago or more. There was an NIH-driven one-day session where somehow during the day, John Boone came up to everybody and said, we really need to get some educational material out there. And he was talking 3 slides. All we need is 3 slides from each vendor that really describes the nuts and bolts of their particular scanner, so that people really get a much better idea of what's going on here. And this 3 slides wound up being lots more than 3 slides, as you can imagine. And what's on there right now is actually a generic version. So we kind of started out with a generic template, which is, I think, pretty valuable as is. And then over time, we're going to add manufacturer-specific slide sets there. So this will be publicly available. It's very specific to radiation dose issues. It's the generic version is already there, and you can look that over anytime. We're hoping pretty soon. We have all of the vendor slides except one, and so we hope to shame that vendor into complying here pretty soon. And maybe within a few weeks or a month, we'll have all of the vendor slides up. And the idea is to help people really understand, if you take this knob and turn it this way, what happens. Because on some of the vendors, if you increase the image quality value, dose goes up. On other ones, if you increase it, dose goes down. And that can be incredibly confusing to technologists. And so this is something that we're trying to put together to help people better understand their 2 current modulation schemes on their scanners. If you need something sooner than that, I would suggest you look over that Imagenologia site, because they already have some vendor-specific information up there that's been there for a while, and I thought that was pretty nice and high-quality stuff. But we're working on doing something more from the physics side that's more dose-specific. So this is what the front side looks like. This is the generic version, and the manufacturer versions will look very much like this, but they'll have the manufacturer logos kind of throughout and the manufacturer specific stuff in there. So these are the kinds of things that you will find, sort of definitions. What is dose, after all? What is CTDivol, and how does that really compare to patient dose? There is still a massive misunderstanding that this dose value you see on the screen is actually what the patient is receiving. And we know that's not true. It's what this funky single-size phantom thing is receiving. And so we're trying to get that word out a little bit better. How does patient size affect dose? And that type of material is in there. Some description and understanding, hopefully, about the acquisition parameter settings. Some generic basic stuff about tube current modulation, and some things about what's actually shown on the scanner in terms of CT dose parameters. The generic version is actually totally editable. This is just a PowerPoint file that you can load, save on your own PC, your own desktop, and monkey with it. Take stuff out of it, add to what you already have, replace what you have, add your stuff to it, change it around. If you don't like the layout, delete this, add that. It's meant to be very flexible and sort of supplemental material to what a lot of you already have nicely developed. Save them, reuse them, pass them around, do whatever you want with them. They're meant to be there for that. The vendor versions, however, the only way we got the vendors to actually agree to do this was to lock down their slide sets. What they're really afraid of, I can't blame them, I guess, is that we will take their material, mix it all up, screw it up, basically, and have their logo all over it, and be telling people stuff that they never intended to be said because it's not true or not correct. So they're very sensitive about their liability in that kind of a situation. So those slide sets will be a lot harder to mess with. Maybe not impossible, but be a lot more difficult. So those I would encourage you to use as is. Try not to monkey with them and get yourself in trouble, because I'm sure there's all kinds of legal junk about that too. And that's pretty much taking you through the entire website. I have a little bit of showing off to do. This working group has been going pretty full blast for a little over 2 years, and to our surprise, total surprise, the FDA decided to give us an award. They apparently, every year, the FDA has a set of awards that they bestow to mostly inside people. So these are folks who have done something particularly well and have been officially recognized for that. I think Thalia had something to do with this, but she's not really admitting it. But someone in the FDA administration side put us up for this, and this is not something you just sort of nominate a group for and then walk away. It takes a lot of support, a lot of follow-up, a lot of pushing for this to happen. So somebody in the FDA actually really appreciates what we're doing. They gave us this special citation award for developing CT imaging radiation safety instructional materials through a collaboration of end users, CT manufacturers, and Food and Drug Administration. So they, typical government stuff, they kind of focused on one little piece of the big picture. But that's fine. We're happy. And somewhere in the description, they cited us as an outstanding example of what can be accomplished through the collaboration of key stakeholders. So they're appreciating, I think, that we've got all the vendors involved, that we're all talking, we're working together, we're actually producing really good material and making it totally available to the entire public. Mark Sapanich, who's one of the physicists on this team, was curious about how many how much traffic we're actually seeing on this website. And so he and our website guru kind of tracked through it and figured out that in the about 2 years that it's been up, that it's had about 50,000 independent hits. So it is seeing some traffic, and it does sort of jump up every time we release a new protocol or some new piece of the website. There does seem to be a quick boost in the traffic. So it's been, I think, really a good experience. It's one of these things that may never end, which is maybe not so great, but we really are, I think, doing a pretty nice job. This was after the award ceremony. These were the 4 pieces of the work group that actually managed to be there and represent us. We had our META representative, one of the vendor reps, and Thalia from FDA. And this is what the award actually looks like. I didn't take this picture. This half clear, half not clear thing was way too hard for me. I just took it right over to our photographers and said, hey, deal with this. It's sitting on my windowsill right now. I'm not sure quite what to do with it, but it's very pretty. So that's all the material I had. I knew it would be a little bit short. So there's plenty of time for discussion about this or pretty much anything else that's CT related if you'd like to ask me.
I was wondering about the dose alert software that goes with the new scanners. Is that something that is optional, which means that you have to pay extra for it, and likewise an annual fee for it?
My understanding is that it comes with the scanners, that the FDA sort of made that not optional. All the scanners past a certain vintage will have it, and it will be set with that 1 gray limit. And if you never want to look at it, other than that, you don't really have to until you hit that 1 gray limit, and then you're going to be in a bad way. But as far as I know, there's no annual fee or anything else associated with it.
We obtained one on a special procedures room, which is a sort of like our TV. We're going to give it to you so long free, but then it's going to be so much per year. But it had an audit. It has a monthly audit feature to it.
Nice. Yes.
In this tab about those that you guys are putting together, are you planning to put like organ doses, a table of organ doses for each protocol?
Okay, so the question was, are we going to ever put organ doses in the CT protocol piece? Right now, what we have are CTDivol ranges for most of the body exams because there is no one value that's ever going to make sense. And probably ranges or something on the head. I forget how we did that. But we have some guidance in there for sort of where we expect to be given these parameters for normal patient populations. At this point, there's no discussion about organ dose values. And that's kind of tricky. I know the dose tracking software can often produce them, but they tend to come from these sort of standardized patient models that don't necessarily reflect our patients. And I can't quite figure out how they handle things like organs that are fully irradiated and organs that are only partially irradiated. And so I'm not convinced that those values are terribly meaningful yet. So I think it may be a while before we jump into that fiery hoop. Yes?
What's your opinion on weight-based protocols? Are you doing such at the
Okay, so the question was, how do you size categorize your protocols? And lots of folks use weight. We see, weight doesn't, even height and weight together don't always tell the story. You can have someone use the height and weight to calculate something called body mass index. BMI is often used when we're thinking about stratifying for patient sizes, but you can have a couple of people with the same height and weight, and one be wildly athletic, muscular, and the other be totally sedentary and have totally different shapes. So it's a hard thing to really figure out. So most people, I think, try to use weight and height together. What we do, the best thing would be to use some kind of attenuation thing, right? Because it's really the patient attenuation that should drive your technique for that patient. And we initially thought patient circumference in the sort of the middle of the scan region would make a lot of sense. And we had thought we would supply tape measures to all the rooms, and knowing that they would disappear in like 30 seconds. But that was kind of our initial thought. And then we thought about it some more. At that particular time, we were still printing to film, and one of the things you have to be neurotically compulsive about if you print to film is the display field of view. Because if you're going to use a ruler on that thing, your display field of view has to be totally constant and really well controlled, or the tumor size will change just depending on your mag factor. So we had already been wildly, compulsively putting the display field of view on all of the documentation for our imaging requests. And we thought, gee, display field of view is a fairly reasonable surrogate for patient circumference. It's not perfect, but it's kind of ballpark. And so we have been using the display field of view to separate our smaller and larger patients. It's not great, and I think it's part of why we have some inconsistency in our image quality is that some of the techs will say, put the patient on the table, look at the localizer and say, measure him up and say, I think I need something a little bigger for this patient, and push him into the larger size and the larger technique. And others will say, I can scrape off some of this fat stuff and use a tinier display field of view and go to a smaller size than probably is wise for that patient. So it's not great, but that's what we're using. Yes?
So if you're having, let's say for an example, an abdomen protocol, how many different sizes would you have? Small, medium, large, or?
Okay, so the question is, for an abdomen protocol, how many different size protocols do we have? And right now we have two. We have sort of small and average, and we have large. We've kind of moved around with that, but right now there's just two. Something that we are just starting to figure out, we assumed that these two current modulation schemes were supposed to work for at least adult patients from the small to the large. You'd get pretty much consistent results up and down the scale. And we actually tested that with some human-sized phantoms and found that it's pretty tight up until a certain size, and then it starts over. So our graphs were measured noise versus noise index, and we had a very nice tight linear relationship for the small and average, something quite different for the large, and something quite even more different for the extra large people. And when we sort of tried to throw this over GE's head and hit him in the head with it, and what's the deal with all this, we were told that on the larger patients, they actually look at the signals at the detector and do something a little different with some of the signal processing because there's few data there. And so the noise in the image is different for the larger patients than you might expect based on the smaller patients. And we're still trying to get our hands around that and really how to deal with that. So if you've noticed that the radiologists don't complain so much about the really big patients like you'd expect them to, it could be that there's something else going on kind of behind the scenes to help with those. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there an automatic notification mechanism for changes?
An automatic notification system for when changes are made to the website that we might sign up for. That's a really interesting idea. No, right now there isn't. We usually send out an email blast to all the members saying, hey, we got a new protocol on there. You might want to check it out. So you've all probably gotten some of those, but you would like something more than that? Or aren't you getting those? Maybe you're getting them and you're not paying attention to them. Yeah, we've seen a lot of that lately. Any other questions? Yes.
You could just put on a last update.
That's a great idea. So the suggestion was to put last updated. Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to do that for some of our internal stuff. And that's what I want to look at too. That's a great idea. I'll pass that on. Any other questions? All right, then. Let's break a little early, give you a chance to get in line for coffee or find that next room in the mystery place.